All right, we are going live, and I want to know if you guys can hear me. Let me know in the Jay's Analysis YouTube channel audience if you can hear our discussion before we start rambling and nobody's listening. Just want to make sure. It says we can hear. All right, Dave, talk a little bit, see if they can hear you.
Check one, check two.
Everybody hear Dave? All right, sounds like we're good. Okay, welcome. We finally found a person who wants to finally step up to the neo-pagan heathen plate and play a little bit of that, heathen baseball at the heathen diamond. We're gonna see if our opponent has the stuff. He says he wanted to do it. So I'll tell you what. So I'm new to you. Tell my audience who you are, what took you down your path. Take as much time as you need. I'm going to let you say whatever you want to say. So welcome to the show. Thank you for stepping up, Dave.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And before I get started, I'd like to thank you again for letting me come on here and have the opportunity to test my steel against a formidable opponent such as yourself. You are a master of your craft, and I have quite a few friends that tune into your content and speak highly of you. So, thank you for having me on, and thank you to everybody tuning in. I appreciate all you guys, and hopefully this is a fruitful discussion and we walk away with this both learning something and going away with more wisdom than we had before. But I am Big Dave Martel. I am a veteran of the podcast circuit. I have been involved in all kinds of political nonsense. I ran MadAmericanNetwork.com. I've notorious troll. I've been around the block for quite a few years with all this stuff, but I am also a folkish heathen. I practice the faith of Asatru. I have been converted for about a decade. I've been practicing 100%. Before that, I was researching, doing my research and everything like that. I was elected as Gothi, which is like sort of like a priest of my kindred about 6 years ago. And it's been a wonderful experience rediscovering my faith. However, as a child, I was raised kind of half-ass Catholic, half-ass Christian, kind of like, how a lot of us are growing up with boomer parents that, we don't really do. We go to church a few times a year and, they, the golden rule, and they don't really understand the theology. But I do have some family that are very, very well versed in the Catholic theology. And I'm not one of the autistic pagan folks out there and that, go out call people Christ cucks all the time. I will call people cucks if they act like cucks or if I think their position could be cucked. But I don't go out there and start war with Christians. I have so many wonderful Christian brothers and friends and family members in my life that, I respect them. That is their path. That is their perennial truth. And I even have I have a few little statues of my grandfather, who was a devout Catholic, that I still have, and I regard them as sacred because it's not my faith, but it was my grandfather's faith, and my grandfather was a tremendous man. I have a statue of St. Jude, statue of St. Thomas Aquinas, so that I do certainly believe that there are good spiritual truths, perennial truths within the Christian theology and the Christian doctrine. But I converted to paganism, folkish Asatru, about 10 years ago, and I've been practicing ever since. And that's about it. That's how I started.
Okay, first thing I would ask is what are the convincing things? What are the things that convinced you that was the path to go? I mean, like why did you? What was there like a series of steps that you went through of like, our people are kind of being warred against in the media and so forth, and therefore that should be expressed in my religious perspective, and so therefore I need a kindred that I don't really get at like a Novus Ordo church or a normie Catholic type of situation. Was it like a series of steps, or did you have like a one book that you read that just kind of changed your mind, or what was it that was really kind of the defining points that made you go that route?
Well, I mean, those are all kind of material reasons, and those are certainly positives when it comes to Asatru, like the tribe, the kindred kind of format, the folkish format, the just the idea of your ancestry, also being tied with your spirituality. But that's not what brought me to it. All of those things actually came later when we started getting into the more heated political climate and all of this stuff. And I became more aware of it as I got older into my adulthood. And I had children and got married and stuff like that. But what drove me into my spirituality were spiritual experiences. I had spiritual experiences that I could not explain, that were parallel with a lot of what is talked about in our spiritual texts, which are the Eddas. And I just, I guess it was just revealed to me. I've found things I don't believe in coincidence, but I kind of stumbled upon things and they resonated with me, and it just all kind of came together, and I just ended up here. I can't explain it 100%, in material terms, but it was just I feel that it was a path that I was meant to be on, and the gods revealed all of these wisdoms to me, and this is how I ended up here. The stuff that you're talking about, those things are absolutely true. And those things are very true for what draw people in now. And I'm not saying anything bad about people that get drawn in because they have a yearning, or a cultural or an ethnic yearning, or a nationalist yearning, or a family kind of thing that they're lacking before, as you said, the normie Catholic. And so I'm not saying that those things are necessarily bad. And my experience was superior or anything of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
But my experience, my path into my faith was purely based on spiritual experiences.
Okay, so my first question would be, there's 2 points here. For one would be, and I'm not trying to offend you or challenge the claim that you didn't have a spiritual experience, but number one, how do you know that those spiritual experiences are good, or that they line up with what is good in some objective sense? And number two, I think the chief problem that I see in any kind of pagan view or any kind of approach like this is that it ultimately does kind of fall into relativism, because there's not really any way to justify or know that there is objective truth. There's really just everybody's kind of competing claims, and your subjective experiences are just as valid, or I mean, how could you measure your subjective experiences as to why this religion is true for you, or why the spiritual experiences that you had were necessarily good? Maybe they were from an evil spirit or something like this. How do you adjudicate between the true and the false, and the good and the evil, if it's essentially a subjective type of system?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's subjective. I would say, what is now. I'm not a biblical scholar by any stretch. So correct me if I ever paraphrase anything that's incorrect. But what did Christ say about knowing whether or not people or like divine teachers were actually divine? He said, look at the fruits of their words, or something like that. Correct? I look at. Go ahead.
Well, I would say that's one thing that we look at, yeah, but he gave a lot of different kind of test cases, litmus tests for how we know the true and the false. So just
Sure.
because in other words, if I already believe that what I am interested in is true, then I will interpret the fruits to vindicate that. I'll have a kind of a verification bias if I already believe something's true. So in other words, you kind of already have to have a system or a paradigm by which to judge the true and the false, to know if they actually are, quote, fruits of that system.
Well, I mean, that's an argument that a lot of times atheists used in order to kind of beat up on spiritual truths or perennial truths or things like that. But with the thing that Christ said, I measure the metric that I use to know whether or not my path is true is the fruit that came from it. When I converted, I was I come poor white trash. I came from a single mother household. I had a really rough early adulthood. I was really bad into drinking and partying and doing drugs, and I was pretty much a huge just degenerate until I started feeling some kind of way, and I met my wonderful wife, and I started to walk this path and practice ceremony and really put my faith in my heart and my spirit and gave it to the gods. And from then I've done a complete just turnaround. My life is completely turned around. I have a decent career. I have 2 beautiful, wonderful boys. I have so many wonderful friends. My life is just the fruits of what has come from walking this path, are just immeasurable. I've just been rewarded so much. The gifts that I've been given are
Okay,
just
but
objective.
like, so I mean, similar things could be said about somebody who has a moral reform or a change of life that goes into any cult or religion. So in other words, a person could conceivably say the same things about going into Scientology. A person could say the same things about, oh, I was a bad alcoholic and I got involved in AA, and then I joined I don't know, a yoga cult, and it just completely changed my life. And so in other words, even still, I think it kind of misses the point that how do you know that the religion itself is true on the basis of the fact that some good things happen, when that same kind of litmus test could be applied to any different kind of group where people join it and they perhaps have positive effects in their life later. That doesn't necessarily prove that the system of belief itself is true.
Well, number one, like I understand why you're using this argument, but this is essentially an atheist argument to kind of bring spiritual truth back down and try to force it into material metrics and stuff. I mean, that argument could be used against people that say they've had spiritual experiences in Christianity, or how do we know that the Word of God is true? How do we know that the Bible is true? Well, that. Well, you say that
it is right. I use that argument a lot.
Yeah,
as a Christian apologist.
Yeah.
So, but the fact that atheists use this argument doesn't mean that it's a quote atheist argument.
But
Atheists will use logic. That doesn't mean logic comes from atheists.
But it comes down to what is the metric of good? How do we know that? How do we define good? What is these things that happen in my life? How are they good compared to somebody that joined Scientology? Well, the things that are good that have been happening in my life are objectively good. They're objectively good. I mean, I had a family, I had children, I started to get financial success, I have a career. Like, these things are all just all easily, they're just objectively good. Somebody that joins the yoga class that you're talking about.
But how do you determine what's objectively good, and on what basis are there objective truths and principles?
Because, well, how would you define good? Define good.
Well, ultimately, it's a transcendental category that applies to God. So God is the ultimate absolute, and because He's omnipresent and omniscient, eternal, etc., that's the grounding that I have for any kind of a claim of that nature. Any kind of a universal absolute claim kind of makes sense with belief in a single universal personal God. Whereas if there's not that, then it kind of seems to be chaos and fate that rules the universe, and there's not really any universal principles at all.
But you're saying that you're a Unitarian, obviously. So you're saying that there is a universal, primordial, perennial truth, right?
Well, I'm a monotheist. I'm not a Unitarian. I mean,
we can get into that too.
Well, I mean, that's a specific heresy that's kind of it was invented, in the last few centuries after the Puritans, with, people like Horace Mann and Thomas Jefferson were Unitarians. So that's a specific kind of Jehovah's Witness style type of cult.
My apologies.
No, it's okay. I'm just saying that it's monotheism isn't Unitarian, but so how does that? I don't understand the argument here. So what if it's monotheist? How does that?
Okay, well, if you want to talk about monotheistic, I actually disagree with the idea that European brands of Christianity are monotheistic. I think you talk about you believe in the Trinity, correct? You believe in
Sure.
the Trinity. Do you believe in angels and saints and stuff like that?
Sure.
So how is that monotheism?
Well, because the source of all life, the source of all existence, the source of all those created beings is God the Father.
Yeah, and you would pay homage to the saints and pay homage to the angels and pay homage to these manifestations of the divine, correct?
Right, because paying homage or reverence is different than worship.
So you essentially are a polytheist.
No, we consistently argue against polytheism because there's only one God, one divine nature.
Yeah, we have a very similar concept. We believe in the overarching primordial divinity as what Christians call God, and then, like Christians, we have our gods, which would be, I guess, sort of like in the Christian pantheon, I guess, like angels or lesser kind of entities and stuff like that, and then we have heroes who we believe to be divinely inspired men, like saints. So it's the
Right.
exact same concept, but with different semantics.
No, it's actually very different concepts because we don't think that any of the saints or any of the angels actually possess the divine nature. So we have a very specific reason why we believe in a distinction between created and uncreated things. So the created world has a beginning in time. It has it's held in existence by God, and it has a certain telos that God has determined for it. But that's different than the kind of being that God is. And the reason that we are different from what you're talking about is because if you begin to blend the two, and you kind of have these gradations, or what would be maybe a chain of being idea amongst the Greeks, very similar to what you're talking about with henotheism, or that there's these gradations of participation in the divine nature and all this kind of stuff. It's really incoherent. So once we've adopted an incoherency about our starting point, the whole system kind of makes no sense, because if the divine nature is kind of this beyond kind of great thing that everything participates in gradations, then it's not truly one. It's not truly simple, and we don't really know anything about it, because everything kind of gets molded into that great oneness. This is the problem with all monistic religions. So what's unique about Christianity, the reason why the Trinity is different in this regard, is that we don't believe in a complete, absolute, unknowable oneness or monism. And we also don't believe in a complete chaotic particularity where everything's crashing against each other and everything's just ruled by chaos. There's actually both unity and multiplicity are in perfect balance in God himself. It's not in perfect balance in a whole bunch of chaotic gods and Zeus having sex with turning into an animal and having sex with women, and it's all chaos and nonsense. And that's another problem, I think, with that view. I'm not trying to get too off course, but there's not really any coherency to the pagan conception. We have a very worked out philosophical and theological perspective that we believe comes from revelation, and what we get in paganism is much more of a kind of sort of primitive anti-philosophic bias. And so that's why there's naturally a rejection of ideas like objective truth. But the problem is that we see that I think those religions still need and want objective truth just as much as the atheist wants to have an objective universal principle or truth, but he doesn't have any consistent way to talk about it or justify such a thing or give a coherent reason why there would be such a thing in his worldview. The same criticism applies to the neo-pagan or the heathen or whatever, that if chaos and fate rule these things, then you really don't even know if all of reality has this great oneness of divinity that all the other beings participate in by gradation. It's just something that you subjectively read somewhere or made up, and then the next guy could come along and say, no, I'm actually the incarnation of Odin. There is no, on what basis is one of these things true and the other's not?
Well, first of all, I'd like to reject, sometimes there's people get used to using like weaponized language. And one of the examples of weaponized language that you're kind of rolling out here is saying, oh, well, you believe in the oneness, but it gets convoluted and clogged up because then you have all this chaotic stuff that comes down the. And I reject the idea of it being chaotic. In fact, it's very, very orderly, the understanding of our gods and the hierarchy of our gods, and the eschatology around all of it.
So, but I mean, the whole history of various mythologies in different cultures isn't the gods fighting with one another and cheating with one another and stealing wives and kidnapping humans and practicing bestiality. That's not in the history of the gods.
Well, no, but you're boiling it down. I mean, you're a spiritual guy. You understand when you read scripture that you're not supposed to get hung up on the details. Atheists make this argument all the time. They'll read like the story of I don't know.
How do you know when it's a detail that matters?
Excuse me. Let me finish, please. But the atheists they'll use the example of like the story of Job, and they say that how the story of Job happens, and God punishes Job and to prove to the devil that he's so loyal to God and this and that. And then atheists say, well, how do why would you worship a God that does that? And then and so you understand that when you look at that story, you're not looking at necessarily the details. You take a step back and you draw the universal spiritual truth that comes from that story, the moral teaching of that story. So when you look at the Bible has tons of who are regarded as divinely inspired men or godlike men and stuff that do degenerate shit, that do bad shit. I mean, it's like, so to say that, because there's these stories where the gods do things, that are lousy. Like, for example, the saga of Vali, where Odin is so angry about the killing of his beloved son Balder that he goes and he essentially date rapes a giantess woman, a princess, in front of her father, so they can give birth to a child that goes and murders and gets revenge for the killing of his son. I mean, that sounds awful. I mean, it sounds degenerate. But if you take a step back, you understand the nature of Odin, and you understand that Odin is he sees all things. He sees all of time, past, present, and future happening simultaneously. And then you go on to understand that Vali goes on to be one of the most crucial characters within the cycle of time.
So first of all, it's a big difference between saying that David sinned and God or Jesus committed sin. Those are two different things, because we believe that God is God, and God he's not fallen, so he's not going to commit the kinds of actions that you would speak of in terms of that kind of a deity. And so that's very different from saying, well, the Bible has men committing atrocious actions. Yeah, because that's part of the message of the Bible, is that we're fallen human beings. That's why we need God. But again, how do you know when? Again, I think it kind of begs the question to say, well, but that's why you got to step back and not get hung up on the details. I mean, that's really what I'm asking, though, is like, on what basis do we know when something is a revealed truth about Odin, and when it's a thing where we say, nah, let's not really read that literally. Let's step back and find a universal principle. And I mean, there's no clear way to adjudicate this, and the fact that every single pagan could just come along and say what he thinks. I mean, maybe you have the true pagan revelation, but what I'm saying is, how do you know how to adjudicate the two? And the reason I'm asking that is to lead to kind of a clearer issue, to make this clear, is that there are universal principles like reason and logic, mathematics. These things are not culturally relative, right? I mean, they're not things that we just make up as social constructs. The forms and patterns that we see in nature, concepts about logical laws, syllogisms, and so forth, they're not human constructs. They're actually operant principles in the world. And what that suggests is that there is a consistent pattern of reason and doing reasoning. And what I get from you is that's a kind of an atheistic approach. What we want is to return to spirituality. So you kind of set reason against spirituality. We don't do that. We believe human reason is perfectly in line with spirituality.
No. Because first of all, I didn't imply that. What I'm saying is that atheists are essentially just they're here to tear. They're Discordian. They're just here to tear it down. They're just using weapons. They're not. I mean, I agree with you entirely. If you in heathen theology, we say the same thing. Human nature, logic, reason, mathematics, all of these things are completely in tune with our spiritual philosophy. Like you're talking about the mathematics, and I just briefly watched some of your video where you talked about numerology and stuff, and that nailed it on the head. I would say that same exact stuff, except I would switch out some of the language that I use. You were describing kind of the same thing, except the argument here is coming from essentially semantics. It's coming from semantics.
No, it's not. It's very different to say that there's one God with omniscience, and who by his divine providence is the basis by which we ground these principles in universals that are operant in nature, and contrasting that with saying, well, there's a chain of being, and at the top there's Odin, and then there's all these kind of conflicting, gods or whatever. So, I mean, are the gods fighting or not? Are they just representations of symbolic principles, or are they actual entities that are fighting out there in the world?
I mean, all of the above. It's here's the thing about in heathenry, we don't try to pretend that we understand, and our little human minds can express and really define what is divinity, what are the cosmic mechanics of the universe. We're not going to. So we have the gods to teach us it through story and allegory and scripture how to understand it and behave properly during our short time on this life in our earthly vessels until we pass on to the next life.
Okay, how do you know when you're supposed to enact revenge, and how do you know when you're supposed to not? I mean, there's no consistent ethic in this at all.
There is, absolutely.
How do you know? How do you know when is a good action, when is a virtuous action, when is it not? When are you supposed to go to war? When are you supposed to have a vendetta? When are you supposed to not?
I mean, it says clear and day in the Eddas. It says in the Havamal. There's plenty of clear as day, succinct descriptions on how you should behave in certain things, how things should be done, and how to live your life and how to make decisions and stuff like that.
Okay,
however,
how do you know those aren't the details that don't really matter that you're supposed to overlook and find a universal principle?
How do you know that the ones in your scripture are?
Well, we have a way of a pattern of knowing this, because it's not just me reading this book. There's a whole history that goes into where this came from and fulfilled prophecies. There's no fulfilled prophecies in paganism.
Absolutely, there is. Absolutely, there is. Ragnarok. Look at the story of the cyclical nature of time. It describes to a T the cyclical nature of civilization, and it coincides. It coincides. No. It coincides with the stories that come in the Vedas. What they talk about in Sanatana Dharma is like when they describe the yugas.
Those are completely different philosophies.
They're not.
Just because you find a similarity. The basis of that religion is that you need to destroy your ego and find unification with the thusness of the universe. That's why you see yogis sitting out there in their shit, because that religion is ridiculous. It's not the same religion as what you're talking about. So what you do is cafeteria style, pick and choose what you want from each one of these traditions to concoct a thing that you think makes it look all the same.
That's false. First of all, you're implying that I'm saying that the totality, the entirety of all of Hinduism is exactly the same as that. No, what I'm talking about is the original scriptures written in the Vedas hail from a similar ancestral spiritually philosophical root, and we know that in science. We know that we've uncovered these people. The Indo-Aryans, they all hail from the same kind of root philosophy, and that's where it all came from. Now, to get into what they're doing now, the root philosophy comes from, it's called Proto-Indo-European.
Oh, so in other words, it took secular academics to dig up and prove what is the true revelation. That's the skeletal thing that's been corroded throughout all these millennia, which you're arguing is somehow in some skeletal form true.
So you're going to deny truth?
What is the Ragnarok prophecy, by the way?
So what you're saying is you're going to not deny truth because it comes from a source that you don't like. I thought you just said.
I'm saying that your arguments here are all subjective because you're relying on. They are. You don't see that they are, but they are, because you're relying on principles that are mathematical, that are universal, that are supposedly scientific. But the arguments that you're giving to ground this are subjective. That's the problem.
It's not subjective. You just said a few moments ago that you are in line with logic and reason and science and what we do know and what are mathematical truths. If we uncover a mathematical truth, if somebody that we don't like, that we're not in line with, discovers it, does that make it not true? No, that would be a sinful act, right? To deny something that is absolutely true. So I don't understand why you would want to deny something or expect me to deny something that is a universal truth.
I think you're begging the question because I'm asking how you're getting a universal truth or a universal claim, and then when you explain where it comes from and how you get it, it's a bunch of places that you go to that don't make sense, that aren't consistent with the philosophy that you have. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, I made the case that it is consistent, and in fact it's consistent that and I'm making the case, like if you read Dumazil, he points out many different religions across the northern hemisphere, and even you're talking like Iranian and like Zoroastrianism, and all of these faiths have similar universal truths. And
how do you know what they are? That's the question. You're just saying these things. There's no clear you've not given a single clear example of how do I know in a certain instance whether I should enact a vendetta or whether I should run away from it.
Well, that's a different thing.
You say, well, there's a lot of general principles of it.
We're talking about how do I know that it's universally true? How do I know that my spiritual philosophy is true?
Well, what's wrong or right?
I know, well, number one, and how do I know that the mathematics and the metrics in which I use to measure it is true are in fact true? And I'm saying
Mhm.
that one of my metrics, one of my pieces of evidence, is that it coincides and it's parallel with many, many, many other cultures around the world that came to the same conclusion and have even more details.
That's just an appeal to a large number. That's a fallacy. It doesn't matter
No,
how
it's
many
not.
people. That doesn't. Yes, it does.
That's
The
called
fact that you're
consensus.
appeal to consensus is a fallacy.
But that's how science works. How do we come out? How do we
I'm
establish
not
theories?
asking you about scientific consensus. I'm asking you for a logical justification, and you gave an appeal to consensus. That's
No,
all.
but what we're doing is I'm proving that consensus is a legitimate thing. It's a legitimate system. All of
Yeah, but
science
it's
is
not a
based on
logical proof. It's
consensus.
a fallacy.
But it's not. It's absolutely based on consensus. Consensus is the whole reason we have scientific theory in the first place.
Appeal to consensus is a fallacy.
But you asked me what evidence, and I'm giving you one piece of evidence. I mean, you can.
I didn't ask for evidence.
And also, like
Hold on. So there's a difference between a logical justification and empirical evidence or data. I agree with you that we can bring forth pieces of evidence and data, but I asked a more specific question about logical justification for a claim or knowledge of a claim or a metaphysical principle that you're talking about. And you can't justify that by giving me an appeal to consensus, which is a fallacy.
Well, I mean, I don't like the idea of logical fallacies because it's just a way to cop out of an argument. So
no, it's not. You just said you believed in. You just said you believed in logic and universal principles.
Yeah, I
now
do.
You don't.
No, I absolutely do. I
absolutely. You don't believe in the logical fallacies. You don't.
Well, I'll take logic and reason and scientific consensus and real world evidence over just some like subjective, argumentative, tactic.
Yeah. The appeal to consensus is not a subjective tactic. It's an actual fallacy. Do you not understand what fallacies are?
I do, but it's just some shit that like some guy made up so he could escape
you just lost the debate.
Okay, but let's get back. Okay, let's get back to the stuff here. But what was the original topic? We kind of like went crazy around in some crazy.
So we were talking about the ideas of the gods and the ideas of I was talking about fate and the problems that I see in kind of trying to find a basis for paganism in like a perennialist approach. I did a debate a few months ago with a guy who's a perennialist. It was a very similar discussion to what you and I are having. So basically what I'm saying is that I just see a bunch of conflicting approaches that don't really have a unified vantage point from which to try to do ethics, to try to, I'm not saying that in your own life and experience you don't have good things happen to you, or you don't do good things, or you don't have true experiences. I'm not saying anything like that, or that everything you're saying is false. I'm just saying that when I look at the philosophy of the worldview that you have, when I look at the ethical claims of that system, when I look at the metaphysics of that system, when I look at how you know things and how you believe and have come to believe that the Eddas or whatever are a kind of revelation, I'm saying that to me, that's where it kind of breaks down. That's my argument.
Now, I will completely admit to you, and I'm gonna be completely honest, and I know you're gonna jump on me on this, but it's fact that a lot of our history, our artifacts, a lot of our literature, and a lot of our stuff is lost in time, and we have to do a lot of stuff to put it back together. And we still have some work to do to put our faith back together. And that's why we were called, I reject neo-pagan, the word neo-pagan. We are a reconstructionist religion. We are reconstructing. And you're automatically, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, well, if it's not all together and you don't have all the pieces, why would you follow it? Well, because the gods are real, because divinity is real, because this is the way that divinity speaks with me. And every man needs to understand divinity, and we need to get away from materialism. And this is my path out of materialism. And this is the path for many people out of materialism. And it's objective that the fruits of what we're doing and what we're enacting are good. We're getting people stop, when you, in us, a true community, people stop watching porn, they get married, they have kids, they give up drugs, they get good jobs. We build communities, we give positive things to people's lives. And so, to say that, we are a reconstructive movement, and I'm not going to, I can't debate that position because it's true. And I will 100% admit that. But the fact that it is, doesn't take away from the objectively good and objectively true things that we're doing in society and beating back the clown world degeneracy that all of us here, you, me, everybody listening, we all hate this postmodernist clown world garbage. We all see that it's trash. This is our formula. This is my formula. And this is what has resonated with me and what has been the best path for me and for many, many, many thousand millions of us. So that's what I got to say about that there.
So let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say that let's say I have a dream, and I'm being serious here. I'm not trying to be a clown. I'm like, what if I had a dream and I felt like it was my duty to restore the true teachings of Pharaonic Egypt? And so what I do is I go and I kind of construct from the Memphite creation document and the Hermetica and these different ancient texts that we believe come from Egypt, and I put forth a kind of a skeletal approach, and then I build a pyramid out in my backyard, and I get it going, and I say that the true Pharaonic religion requires. I have discovered this through my own research, and I've actually found some scholars that will back me up on this. We've discovered that everybody who follows my cult, that they need to offer their all the hottest daughters all need to be given to me. And that's divine Pharaonic revelation. I am like Muad'Dib. I am the God Emperor. So how would you say that any of this is wrong? How would you say that any of that's incorrect, or on what basis? Because I'm going to say, yeah, but bro, it's objectively true that I am helping out these hotties, because when I'm laying the pipe to my harem of hotties, I'm giving the best possible world for all human beings by more and more offspring coming from JD.
Well, what is the fruit of this guy? Like you, what are you proving? How are you proving?
The Pharaonic religion that I have constructed, those are good fruits, bro.
But that's not fruits. That's just claims. Like you got to produce something to show that you have.
Okay, well, let's say I really do this, and I really do have a harem and a whole bunch of supermodel babes, and I act like I'm a God Emperor. Like, how is that not the fruits consistent with my revelation in my religion?
Well, how would it, if a guy came out like that said he is the next Messiah, and how would you take him, and he could prove it?
Well, I would argue with him the same way I'm arguing with you, is that these constructs kind of break down, because you ultimately have to, when you're going to compare these kinds of systems, you have to go back to things like logic. You have to go back to things like universal claims and principles. And that's going to involve pulling out things like logical fallacies, which I guess you said doesn't really matter.
Well, I actually agree with you 100%. It's 2019. Like we're in current year. So it's going to be kind of hard for a guy to prove to me that he is, the son of Odin, and he's here to establish galactic pagan supremacy, and he's got a whole harem full of,
Okay, but let's say you're not. Let's say that I do this over on my own libertarian island somewhere, and I'm not even messing with your people. What I'm saying is there any basis that you have to say what I'm doing is wrong?
I mean, sure. If you're going against the principles of frith and oath set forth within the Havamal and within the Eddas, then you're not doing a good job.
I'm constructing the true Pharaonic religion.
Yeah, well, no, okay. So number one, if you're constructing the Egyptian religion, I would question you, right away, because you're not Egyptian. You're a white guy, obviously. So
yeah, but there's a good argument to be made that the upper class of Egypt, the upper caste, were actually perhaps Aryan.
Yeah, so, I actually agree with that.
But even so, so what? Why do I have to be part of that racial haplogroup in order to be maybe the gods have donned me the new initiator of the new Pharaonic religion?
Well, okay, so this gets into the debate of folkism versus universalism and perennialism, and that divinity, in our school of thought, divinity is expressed differently among different peoples, and because different people are, as we know in these, in these circles out here on the internet, different people are biologically different. They think differently. They have different attributes. They have evolved in different places. We're just obviously different. It's not one race, the human race. So obviously when something comes down, when they're divinely inspired, they will express divinity in different ways. And that is why it's different. We don't So I could look at.
So there's nothing wrong with my Muad'Dib God Emperor cult. I'm the Kwisatz Haderach. I got a harem. Nothing wrong with that.
Well, there is something wrong with that because you're just coming out with it. You're not. There's no basis in ancestry that shows that it's a tradition.
Yeah, but you just said that you had spiritual experiences that led you to your religion. So I'm saying the same thing. I had a spiritual experience. It happened in a dream. I was told that I need to set up the pyramid in my backyard. On what basis is that going to be degenerate?
Yeah, well, number one, it's not like, okay. So here's the fundamental misunderstanding about heathenry is that people that look through a universalist lens still keep looking through a universalist lens. It's not a universal religion that you could just pick up. It's not something that you could just practice. It's not Buddhism. It's not Christianity. It's not something you use. It is an ancestral tradition. It is a
okay, but that's the
philosophy.
problem. Okay, but ancestral traditions are particular, right? They're specific areas or locales within history, geographical places, and so forth. But earlier in the debate, you were making a point to try to say that the point of Odin is that he is a connection to or a manifestation of universal logical laws and principles of mathematics. So those two things, that's why those two things don't make sense.
I'll make it make sense right now. Odin is the Germanic deity that has come to explain to us of Germanic descent how divinity works. He speaks our language. He looks like us. He is part of us. He's the guy that came to teach us how divinity works. That's what that is.
But how does he look like you if he's the ultimate perennial God nature that's beyond all things?
What do you mean? Look at the depictions of him when he reveals himself to people. Yeah, that's how he manifests. That's how people understand him. That's how people have seen him. That's how people depict him. That's how he's expressed in our folklore. Yeah, I mean,
he's universal, but he appears to specific cultures.
Odin is not universal. Odin is not universal. Divinity is universal.
Okay, so is it the same principle that's revealing truths to all these different religions over time and space? That maybe it's not Odin, but it's like an avatar of this same divine principle?
Yeah. So like an equivalent of Odin.
Perennialism?
What's that?
It's perennialism, basically?
Essentially, it is it's very similar to perennialism.
Okay, so the problem with perennialism is that you can't clearly say what is degeneracy and what's not. Is a giant orgy of butt sex, is that degenerate, or is that just part of the rite?
Absolutely degenerate.
R-I-T-E.
It's degenerate. Why?
On what basis?
Well, because it's a dishonorable act. It's a disgraceful act. It's an act of the flesh.
Circle. That's a reification.
Okay, so
you're saying it's bad because it's bad.
No, okay. So within Asatru, we understand that in order to achieve a higher level, in order to like what you should strive for in your life is you should find a balance between all of the natures of being, all of your levels of existence, which, I'm sure, I mean, I know you're a Plato guy. Plato talked about the tripartite soul. Many other people, philosophers, talked about the tripartite soul. Everybody understands tripartite soul. It appears in all European spiritual philosophies. Same thing. In order for you to ascend to a level of awakening and to a level of, I guess, spiritual oneness, you must balance mind, body, and spirit. In order to balance them, you must master them. And to be like kind of a slave to just like carnal thirsts is the opposite of that. It's anus worship. It's worship of the material, and that is degenerate.
Okay, but Plato also thought playing around with little boys was good.
I mean, it doesn't mean everything he said was good, you know?
Okay, so we're back at the pick and choose cafeteria approach.
I mean, you're picking and choosing too. You like Plato. Don't tell me you don't like Plato, and then
you must not be familiar with what I talk about, because I critique Plato more than I praise Plato. I mean, yeah, I talk about when I think he says things correct, but
so you're
most of my talks are critiques.
But you are picking and choosing. You say that he does say some good stuff.
Yeah, but I have a basis for and believe in universal logical principles that directly relate to the mind of a personal God. And you're telling me that it's both subjective and irrational and coherent and rational at the same time. That's the problem. There's a dialectic between a universal rationality that you want to have to make truth claims and to say something is objectively wrong in XYZ cases. And then on the other hand, you're saying, well, I can't really say because in our religion, it's based on my people group, this revelation to Germanic peoples. That's not universal. So the problem is that there's an attempt to have both things at the same time. And it's based on, again, a kind of a dialectic. And I think that, again, this goes back to the Trinity. This is one of the reasons why the Trinity resolves this problem of one and many, is because we don't believe that there's an ultimacy to either unity or to particularity in the many that's out there. We believe that God is both one and many, but ultimately there's one personal God. So that's the reason and basis for how we can have a logical approach to adjudicating between true claims, false claims, true religions, false religions, is that it's not subjective, it's objective. And it's not just saying it's objective. There's actually a logical basis for how there are objective truth claims.
Now, this goes back to why I think a lot of it's semantic, because like when I hear you talk about, well, it's the separation between one and many, we just have the one and then there's the many, but then you also pay homage to the many, but then it's not homage, it's not worship, it's homage, it's different. It's just a bunch of these semantic arguments. I feel like we're both wearing like green shirts, except you're telling me your shirt's not green. It's
It's not semantics, because even you yourself have already said that presumably the terminology that you would differ in when you read the Vedas and you find things that you don't agree with, that's on the basis of the terminology and the words that are there. So all differences are semantic. That has nothing to do with but semantics matter because words match up to reality.
Well, what you're saying is that there's a universal mathematic understanding of things that create an objective metric to measure things, right?
Sure.
That's what I'm doing. I'm saying that, in this, these guys came up with 2 + 2 = 4. These guys came up with 2 + 2 = 4. My stuff says 2 + 2 = 4. Therefore, 2 + 2 must equal 4. That's what I'm coming up with. That is the metric.
Except that that's not what you were saying in the first half of the discussion.
That is what I was saying.
No, because mathematics is directly related to logic. Logical laws can be formulated most of the time, many times in mathematical forms and principles. So that means that you can't, for example, deny fallacies, because a logical fallacy is nothing more than a specific example of something that is a formal logical principle. And those logical principles are essentially the same as mathematical laws. Like if you talk about a universal or universal negative, universal claim, those are very similar to things in math claims and math sets. So to on the one hand say that, and then say that for example, the informal fallacies don't matter, shows that that's not really in your mind when you approach your perspective or your worldview. So again, what I hear is an attempt to want to be objective and to have objective principles, but at the same time to want to have a complete subjectivity and irrationality that allows for you to pick and choose in a kind of cafeteria approach which things are true and which things are false. And again, there's not, if you don't have, do you have access to the ultimate divinity that's beyond Odin, that's present as the skeletal outline of all religions?
I mean, we see it every day. It's everything is an expression of the divinity.
So it's monistic.
Yeah, sort of.
Okay, so if monism is true, this breaks down at a really fundamental philosophical level. If monism is true, then ultimately everything is at root one, right?
Everything. Okay, so it's not everything is the root one. Everything
is at root one.
Okay, well, so what monism, what you're talking about is that everything is part of the great oneness. Everything is involved in the great oneness. That's not necessarily what I'm saying. What I'm saying is everything is an expression of the great oneness, including the gods, including, which are different for each people. And, that's what I'm getting at here. Now, I want to, before we go on, you said that the metric that I'm using to describe logic along with my line of thinking doesn't coincide with what I was originally talking about. I want to know exactly what you're talking about that didn't coincide.
Because you said that the appeal to consensus is not a fallacy, and it is. Therefore, everybody who would do logic and basic logic would know that an appeal to consensus is an informal fallacy, but informal fallacies are nothing more than examples or instantiations of universal principles that are formal fallacies.
Yeah, it's just when I'm discussing stuff with people, and it just a lot of times, I'm sure you've ran into this, people that are masters of sophistry. It's the logical fallacy thing is a very easy escape for them to get out of.
Yeah, but there's not going to be any debate that an appeal to consensus is fallacy.
But why is it that science relies so heavily on appeal to consensus?
Because science deals with the domain of empirical research and data. It's not dealing with the domain of rational justification, conceptual justification, epistemic justification.
So shouldn't spirituality be based on research and data as well?
There's an aspect to religion which is experiential and existential, but there's also an aspect which is a priori and conceptual or even mathematical.
But we should absolutely still be logical, reasonable human beings.
That's what I just said. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just don't understand the disconnect here.
Because I'm making a presuppositional critique of your approach, your worldview. Again, the metaphysics, the ethics, the epistemic claims, they don't cohere.
But I'm saying that they do, and it's just we're using kind of.
I know you're saying that, but that doesn't make it so. And I've already kind of been illustrating going through each of these points how it doesn't cohere. But because there's a bunch of conflicting claims.
It's like you're saying this is true over here, this is not true over here, and you're just kind of like mixing it up, so it just all sounds jumbled. But the fact is that I'm saying that you asked me why is it that, or you asked me what is the metric, what is the objective metric to prove the stuff that I'm talking about? Well, I said, and then you said, well, in spirituality we should absolutely use logic and reason. We should be scientifically minded because we are modern people.
It has a place, yes.
Yeah, it absolutely should have a place. Science should always have a place. Good science, right. Not pseudoscience crap. But then I give the example of a very scientific approach of putting this thing together and proving my metric, and then you say it doesn't make sense.
No, because again, there's a distinction between what the domain of science and empiricism investigates and the question that I'm asking that's a higher level question, which is how do you justify claims? And this is pretty normative in philosophical discourse. I'm not trying to be a douchebag. I'm not trying to be a sophist. It's just like if you listen to the debate that I had with JF, for example, we talked about justifying claims or how do we make sense of things like logic in the world. So it's kind of a metalogical question, basically. Yeah, which is I mean, comes up in perennialism. This comes up in the history of Greek philosophy. This is not out there. Like I didn't make this up. This is if you take a philosophy class in the history of Western philosophy, you're going to deal with the justification of claims, the justification of epistemology. How do we know the difference between believing something and knowing something? These kinds of questions. Yeah. So what I asked you was a very pointed thing about how do you know that this religious system is true, and you appeal to a consensus, and I'm saying that is a fallacy. That's all I'm saying.
Well, it's not just the consensus. You asked me about a metric, a scientific metric in which I could prove it, and I just looked to the first thing that I know about science, and that is appeal to consensus. So I gave that as one example of truth. Another example of truth that I gave was the fruits that it bears, how these things that come out from this faith are objectively true, and how these things that come out from this faith are objectively good. I can't imagine in a million years you would argue that having children and living a traditional life and getting back to the simples and rejecting degeneracy is bad. I can't ever see you say.
Yeah, but again, you're missing the point. Is that the question is about knowing and justifying beliefs and claims. How do you know what's degeneracy and what's not degeneracy? That's kind of the question I've been asking from the get-go. Yeah. And you said that, well, it's just objectively good to have kids. That's called a circular argument. That's restating the thing that you think is good. And I'm saying, how do you know how to adjudicate between the two? That's why I gave the analogy of the guy who starts his pyramid cult. You might not agree with where I get my vindication from my dream of the gods talking to me and saying I'm the new pharaoh, but who are you to say that that's not true? I mean, who are you to say, because you grounded your positions on kind of like the spiritual experiences that you had. Like, how do you say that my spiritual experiences are are not as valid as yours?
Okay, well, when we got started, when I was talking about my spiritual experiences, that was to explain how I got here. That wasn't, this later stuff that we're talking about is as my spirituality, my understanding of the philosophy developed and became more refined. That's how I, now I look through different lenses. Let me ask
you this question. So do you understand the idea that, that morals or propositions are theory laden? In other words, if in my belief system, I believe that, and I'm acting on whether I don't even have to believe it or not. If I'm acting on the principle that I'm saying that the gods told me that I should start the pharaoh cult, then what's good in my belief system and my worldview is going to be determined by my assumptions within my paradigm, within my if I believe and if I think that I'm the God emperor, then it is a good thing for me to have a harem and to I don't know, have all the brides of my subjects if I so desire. Like, that's what I determine as a good thing. And I'm saying, on what basis is that not a good? Because the goods in this perennial system or any perennial system are subjective.
But they're not subjective, because, you know, I know we're going to go back to the fallacy of consensus or whatever, but it's parallel with what other people are objectively saying too. The fruits of what happens when you have these practices.
You can't. I can't let that go. You understand that that's not a justification of a claim.
But it's one piece of a justification. You can have multiple angles that come together into one full thing.
Do you believe? Can a lot of people be wrong about something?
Give me 1 second here. And this is what we're running into here. I'm trying to give you like a multifaceted justification, and you're kind of like stopping me on this and stopping me and like picking apart
these fallacy. Then it doesn't work as a justification.
But it can when it's mixed together. Yeah, of course it can. Of course it can.
No, it can't.
Okay, then get rid of that.
Fallacies can justify a proposition or belief system.
Okay, so here's another justification. It says that these behaviors are how we're supposed to act, clear as day in the Eddas, and that was written by divinely inspired men. That is the word of God.
Okay. On what basis do we know that that's the word of God when you were also appealing to like ancient texts like the Vedas to say that it's the same idea there that's in the Vedas?
I'm just confirming that it's saying other things for other people, that the mathematics and the metrics are true.
How do you know that confirms that, though? How do you know which things are the right things to pick out when it's literal and when it's not? Because you said a minute ago, don't get caught up in the details. Well, maybe the detail of a situation or a story about vendetta is a detail I need to pay attention to.
Well, how do you know that? What is your process for justification then?
Well, we have a process within the church, which is where you actually go into the catechesis, the whole mindset of the church spread throughout the world, because there is an objective revelation given in Scripture.
So consensus.
No, it's a mystical experience. It's an initiatory experience.
So how do you know that your experience is better than mine then?
Because it is coherent.
How is it coherent?
Because I can give a justification, a basis for all these things that I'm talking about, how there are these categories, how there are these principles that reflect in the mind of a single personal God. And I don't think you can give me a basis for it.
It kind of sounds like you're just creating this like logical, this giant straw man logical trap, so you could like pick everything apart, put it together, and knock it down. When you're really just kind of describing the same exact thing. You're saying, but no. What you're saying
is philosophy, bro.
It's called sophistry, is what it's called. It's called you're pointing out things.
I don't think
you
know what sophistry is.
I
think that anytime you see a fallacy or get called out, you think that's sophistry. But no, I'm doing philosophy.
But it's the intent behind it. The intent behind it is to
how do you know my intent?
Because we know what the intent is. That's why we're here. We know we're here to debate and stuff. So
you're saying that my intention is to be sophistical and not to be rational or to do philosophy. No, I'm doing philosophy when I'm asking you these questions. The basics of philosophy are ethics, metaphysics, epistemology. So I'm going to be looking at your worldview, your paradigm, your belief system, and seeing if what I see there coheres. I don't see a coherent starting point in any of those positions. And while Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, I would say specifically, it might not have an answer to every single thing, it's at least coherent. So what we do in my approach is we compare two different paradigms and we see which one is coherent, because I believe in a coherent. You want me to be clear? I believe in a coherency theory of truth. I don't think that what I'm getting here is coherent. It seems like a bunch of jumbled up contradictory stuff.
It sounds like you're describing kind of the same thing. You say, okay, well, it says in our text that this is true. It says through spiritual mystic experiences that this is true. And it also says that throughout our church, throughout the time and the world, the consensus of the church. So it's the same exact stuff I'm talking about.
No, text, but the difference is that our paradigm has our paradigm has a basis for how to justify these beliefs in each of these three categories of philosophy. So what I've been doing is critiquing your paradigm, critiquing the basics of where you start the system. And I'm saying that it's not coherent. And I'm saying that if you look at ours, it is coherent.
So what I said was essentially text, spiritual experience, consensus. And then you said text, spiritual experience, and then consensus.
Right. But the point is that the explanation of those things was not coherent.
But it's the same thing at its core.
You can use the same words. I know you're talking about semantics, but I showed you earlier that it's not consistent. How do we know if the guy who starts the cult is degenerate or not?
Okay, how is it?
You said because it's objectively not true, and there's a scientific consensus about. Actually, there's not a scientific consensus about whether having a bunch of kids is true or not, because much of science is bought off and now promotes the idea that you shouldn't have any kids. So there's not even a scientific. What is science anyway? What is the scientific consensus?
There's a whole other debate. It
is. But so and I appreciate that you rejected scientism, but again, there's not going to be a clear you said, well, the Eddas tell us this. Okay, but you also said that the Eddas have a thing where we shouldn't get caught up in the details, like things like, well, you know, the gods seem to act like men, don't they? They seem to be personified human beings.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that I think at root here, what the problem with paganism is that it's relativistic. And I know that you're really reaching for ways for it not to be relativistic, but I don't see how that is justifiable or inescapable.
But, you know, I'm just going to go back to the bottom line is what's the similar about both of our faiths that we're describing, you know, get rid of the debate tactics and all of this is, you know, your justification for spiritual truth is what is said in your texts, what is spiritual experiences, and, you know, consensus. And I would say, I would go further and I would say that my consensus is more thorough than yours. Yours is just based within the confines of your church. Mine branches out to many, many different other spiritual philosophies that branch throughout different.
No, I mean, you can pick and choose and do that. I can pick and choose and say that, well, there's similarities in all these other religions to my religion. Therefore, there's a skeletal outline of how my religion is the true religion. That doesn't really. I mean, that's so vague. It could be anything. I mean, we can find similarities in anything between anything by doing that.
This is the problem with universalism is you think that you have the one universal truth for all of the world, and which has led to multiculturalism and all kinds of this other stuff that has gone down. I'm not saying
that's a ruse, though.
I'm not saying that the Orthodox Church has led to this, or I'm not saying Catholics have led to this, but just the general idea of universalism has been fundamentally, absolutely destructive for all of the world entirely.
Yeah, this is another contradiction. Do you think that your position is true? You've been arguing that there are objective truths. That's a universal claim and a universal position. And now you're trying to make a fallacy argument about how Christianity is the source of, and Judeo, whatever history is the source of universal claims and universal religion.
That's not what I said.
You just tried to argue a few minutes ago that your position has universal moral claims.
No. My position has my position has universal truths. There are universal truths, but universalism isn't universal truths. There are things that are universally true. Like you said, mathematics are universally true, but that's not universalism. Universalism is taking all of your philosophy and believing that all people around the world, it works for them, which is just fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, well, again, I think that what you think is sophistry is, again, doing philosophy, right? This is how philosophy works. This is doing philosophy, is asking questions about assumptions. If you read the Apology, you know, you were talking about Plato and Socrates. I mean, that's essentially what Socrates does when he goes out in Athens, is he questions everybody's presuppositions, their starting points, their paradigm. That's what I'm doing. And no, actually, the distinction that you're trying to make there really doesn't work, because if it's morally wrong for me to start the cult and have a harem and to practice magic butt sex, then it's universally morally. That's a universal claim. So even if you don't want your religion to be universal, but at the same time you want it to have universal aspects, you're still a universalist. Even a relativist, even the most rank relativist who says there's absolutely no truth, man, he dogmatically believes that that is a universal truth. And that's what I'm saying, is that that's inescapable. So you're the one playing a sophistical word game of wanting to have objective universal claims and truths, and then turn around and say, oh, it's the Christian who wants the universal truths, when you have and need the same thing.
Yeah, no, I made the clear distinction that just because there are parts, okay, universal, you admit that there's a difference.
It doesn't matter if there's parts of your religion.
It does matter, because semantics matter. Remember, words matter, definitions matter. You said that. Come on, man.
You believe there's universal truths in your religion.
Yeah, so because there's mathematics.
In some aspect.
There are parts that are universal, because there are some things that are absolutely universal. But as a whole, it is not philosophically universalism.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter whether you tack on the ism on the back of it, because you still believe that it's wrong for me to have the harem and the magic butt sex.
Yeah, well, you know, why do we got to talk about butt sex? Like, can we just make it
prominent in a lot of pagan literature? That's why
it's not prominent. I've read all of the Eddas. I've never seen a single butt sex. No butt sex in
you mentioned Plato earlier. Plato talks about it.
Well, Plato's not Germanic pagan. And in fact, a lot of
We're
people would
talking
argue
about
that
paganism, and you were appealing to Plato. You were appealing to the Indo.
no. I gave an example that I knew you were familiar
Okay, so
with.
only the Germanic tribes were the ones that that refrained from butt sex. Okay,
And
yeah,
in fact,
that's really believable.
And in fact, Tacitus, he explained how the Teutons would throw sodomites in bogs and pile rocks on top of them and disappear them. So sodomy has not been historically something that we are, tolerant of.
Well, whether it is or it isn't, I don't see on what basis is it wrong. I mean,
you just made the claim that there's gods having butt sex in the Eddas, which is, it's just
no.
I
said the Greeks.
All right, well, I'm not Greek.
Yeah, but you've been appealing to other religious traditions as a universal way to vindicate the skeletal outline.
Because I thought that it would be a better.
I thought
it would be better than just appealing to myself, which is what the argument you're doing.
And so the appeal outside of yourself doesn't work, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I'm saying that the appeal to yourself is kind of that's like saying it's appealing to yourself is also subjective, and it's kind of sketchy. I'm saying like there's these other examples all over the place, and you're saying, oh, my examples come from in-house.
No, I appealed to how you justify claims in philosophy. When you go to a debate, there's the assumption that that both parties are going to be subjected to the same rules and laws of logic.
Yeah, well, but it doesn't get past my point here. Is that why is it that my justification I'm using
because they're incoherent,
examples.
They're contradictory.
They're not though. They're not. The example.
Well, you saying they're not doesn't make them not, but they are.
Yeah.
Well,
also you saying that there's gods having butt sex in paganism all over the world doesn't make it true because it's not true. But here's the bottom line.
It is true.
It's not. Okay. Read the Eddas. If you read the Eddas, I will bet you $1,000. $1,000. You will not find one single example.
Why are we supposed to follow the Eddas? Why are we not following Zeus and the Greek myths? Like, why is one true and the other? Well, I said, this is for my people, so it's relative, it's subjective, and I'm saying that you need a way to adjudicate between true and false, between evil and good. You don't get that in your religion.
Well, okay, here's a good metaphor. So, like, I don't know, like, what is, like, say you're trying to express what a light is to multiple different people. Mm-hmm. A light is light. We know what light is. But if you go to, in India, there's a different word for light. Still light. If you go to Germany, there's a different word for light. Still light. Go to Russia, same thing over and over and over. Still light, but it's spoken in different languages. So that makes it's consistently light. It's just spoken in a different tongue.
That's different than trying to say that the same religion is manifesting itself across all these different cultures and that there's a basic skeletal outline between all these different religions. They're not. They're fundamentally contradictory.
There's a difference between religion and God. There's a difference between religion, philosophy, and divinity. Well, I said, what is universal?
Knowing that is true and that you're actually accessing true propositions about the divinity that's beyond the different avatars or whatever. There's no way to know that. The system is completely contradictory and relativistic.
Okay, debate stuff or argumentative tactics aside, is there, yes or no, is there an overarching divine entity in the universe? Yes or no?
Do you understand that the debate tactics aren't tricks, that you're actually appealing to things that are real principles? They're not tricks.
It is because okay, here's the thing. You're trying to prove to your audience by making me pick apart I could say something that's universally true. Like just now, I know you would have said yes, but you avoided the question because you're trying to pick me apart and you're trying to make a display that you and your position are superior to mine, as opposed to having.
I'm trying to make a point to you about how and what the debate is and how universal claims and logic works, and you see it as kind of like a sword that you bring to the battle to way that you like rhetorically kind of sneak around people and make them look bad. And I'm saying I do not view it that way. You can think that I do that, but the way I view it, and I'm being honest here when I tell you this, is that we are actually, our minds are tapping into actual universal metaphysical principles out there in the world. Logic is really a thing. There are real fallacies and all this kind of stuff. They're not just tricks. It's not just semantics. It's real. And so when we approach it that way, what I'm trying to do is look at the justifications here. And again, I mean, you're aware that there's the idea of justifying things in like a philosophical way, like in epistemology.
But this is a performance. This is a production. This is like a
how do you don't know my motives? You're just assuming that this is like theatrics and Hollywood or something.
No. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that you have the intent to defeat paganism.
How do you know my intentions?
Because I mean, am I wrong? Am I wrong that you have the intent of promoting your faith and kind of knocking down mine? Yes or
Sure.
no?
That's part
Yeah.
of my intention. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to my first question. Is there, yes or no, an overarching divine entity in the universe, in all of creation?
Sure.
Yeah. So why is it that you're avoiding these universal truths and using like essentially pill pool to kind of pick apart something that's also universally true?
I've been sitting here arguing for universal truths and claims that are only consistent with a personally revealed God, and that is distinct from the idea of all of creation being a kind of pantheistic manifestation of God. So that's very important for us because we don't confuse the creator and the creature. They're two different realms or two different things. Creation can be exalted. It can participate in different operations or energies of God, but it's never the same thing as the divine nature. And that's the central problem with paganism, is that it confuses the divine nature with what's created. And so once you blend those two worlds, what you get is idolatry, and you get the madness and relativism of paganism.
But it's so what? Okay, let's take a step back. What is your metric? What is the justification that your metric for analyzing this is true?
Well, I'm gonna utilize the justifications in philosophical discourse, right?
Okay.
The justifications in logic, the justifications in epistemic analysis, the justifications that also are at times empirical. Sure, there's nothing wrong with putting forth empirical evidence, but that's,
Okay.
again, it's different than the way that we justify a claim, because that has to do with universal claims, and the only way you can justify universal claims is not ultimately empirical. It has to be a priori.
Okay, so you're going to go back to you're essentially using the same justifications as me. You're just using a more,
No,
I guess.
I mean, you missed the entire argument I've been making the whole time, and
No.
you're just saying it's pill pull, it's Talmudism, it's this kind of stuff. No, I mean, philosophy is not pill pull.
But debate tactics is.
Yeah, but it's because I mean, are you not familiar with debate? Like,
I mean, I am.
I'm not trying to be rude to you,
No, I know.
I mean, justifying claims is not semantics and tricks.
But when you split hairs and you try to pick apart every single little detail before it's
Well, I don't think having a harem and magic butt sex is splitting hairs.
I mean,
that's a simple question.
well, I mean, I would never advocate for any kind of butt sex ever.
I know, I'm not saying you are. I'm asking the question of how do we adjudicate between whether that's degenerate or not.
But you keep bringing up butt sex, and I'm just saying that it triggers me, and I don't want to talk about butt sex. That's all I'm saying here.
Okay, well, we can pick a different human sacrifice. We'll pick a different thing that we think is degenerate.
Okay, so I made the distinction that just like you did, that the justification for why my faith is true is holy text, is consensus, is results, the fruit of what has happened, results, the conclusion. That's the same thing you said. So it's just like all of this other stuff just seems kind of like fluff to me. You know what I'm saying?
All right. Well, do you want to go? I mean, I'm not mad or anything. I think it was a great discussion, but you want to do like a Q&A? We've been going for a good while here.
Yeah, yes, sir.
So you want to do a Q&A, and we'll take maybe some super chats and all that, and then we'll do like maybe closing statements towards the end. Is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay. So everybody, if you want to, if you send some super chats, and we'll do some Q&A, and I'll read the ones that are here. What do you think of this is Womp Womp $5. What do you think of borrowing some pagan ideas, like throwing these people in the bog? Well, actually, well, the Old Testament laws about that were pretty strict, and of course, in the history of Byzantium, you have pretty strict laws about that kind of stuff. So I don't think it really has to. What the pagan perspective in Germanic tribes or amongst degenerate Greeks is, in my view, doesn't really have any bearing on what a Christian civilization could enact on the basis of their understanding of divine law. Do you have any comments on that?
I'm the fucking Boglord. I'm all for the bog. All right. Cowards, shirkers, traitors, sodomites, all manner of degenerates.
All right. We don't want to get the channel taken down. So, all right. So we have a strong view on that. Gotcha. Corneliu Cordiano, 50 Knox. Jay, debate Steven Anderson. No, I'm not going to debate those guys. They're not they're not good-willed opponents in debates. Imperium, $5. How is perennialism any different than relativism? By the way, I love how my low IQ tweet inspired the greatest debate of 2019. Well, wow. I don't.
Whoa, really?
He thinks it's yeah, that's a compliment to both of us. Thank you, Imperium. I would say if you saw the debate that I did with Eric, I don't believe that perennialism is any different from relativism.
Yeah, I would say it's oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's if you have any comments, feel free.
Yeah. Well, relativism is this is kind of a hard thing because some things, I don't believe in these dichotomies. Like you can have things that are objective and then also subjective. You can have things that are both simultaneously true. You can have pieces of this and pieces of that because the divinity is in like spiritual philosophy isn't just like bound by our material definitions. I mean, you can take a step back. Now, what we're talking about tonight is the absolute objective metrics in which you measure these things. But to say that relativism is subjective and all bad. I mean, obviously I believe very strongly in perennialism. So yeah, I say that I guess it could be relative. I guess I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a big topic that goes into more and more discussion.
Eric Jewell, $10. How do you feel about the practice of drinking male fluids as practiced by Odin? I'm not aware of that, but
I'm not aware of that either. I have no idea what the hell he's talking about.
I think he's trolling, but let's see. Lawrence Balanag, $2. Anyone want to match my chat? Well, I don't know. Do they? All right. So a little bit of super chat action there. Let's see. You want to do a closing statement? I'll let you, if you want to do a closing statement, go first, and then I'll give mine.
Sure, absolutely. And Mr. J,
wait, hold on. We got another super chat here.
Let's do it.
Jake Berg, $5. As ortho, can you explicate how our faith is the fulfillment of the expectation of nations? Yeah, I would say that if you look at a lot of those Old Testament predictions, like Genesis 12, Genesis 15, Genesis 17, God says to Abraham that the gospel will expand out of Israel to the whole nations. And so there's a lot of predictions in Amos. There's a lot of predictions in Hosea, Isaiah, major prophets, Daniel, etc. That Daniel even says in Daniel 9 that by the time of the Roman Empire, and even secular scholars admit Daniel was written prior to the existence of the Roman Empire. Daniel says that by the time the next empire comes after Alexander, after the Greeks, there will be a birth of a Messiah, and you will see the end of the Jewish temple sacrifice. And then he says the Gentiles will be brought into the kingdom. And that's what we've been seeing for the last 2,000 years, is the bringing in of the Gentiles, as Jesus talked about in Luke 21 and Matthew 24. So that's how I think that all the way back to Genesis, the promises of the messianic seed are fulfilled in Christ and in his Orthodox church. And so that's how I understand the fulfillment of the expectation of the nations. So I don't see any more super chats. So if you would go ahead, you have the floor for your final statement.
Beautiful. Well, Mr. J, thank you so much once again for allowing me to step up to the plate here. I hope I presented my position and my faith with tact and cunning. And it's been quite the pleasure to stand up with and clash swords with an intellectual giant such as yourself. You are, as I said before, a master of your craft. And I hope in this time David fared well against Goliath. So thank you so much to you for letting me come on.
What's your final statements on paganism? If you have any final statements?
Okay, so my final statements for paganism, for Asatru specifically, because paganism and Asatru are not synonymous. My final statement is that within the clown world, within the sea of degeneracy and darkness that is Ragnarok, as we approach our final days, it is very hard to kind of find our way back home. It is very hard to find continuity, and we're homesick for a place that we don't even know exists. We've never seen it. So what is Asatru? Asatru is the gates to Hyperborea. It is a way for us to master our mind, body, and spirit, and become in touch with our ancestral knowledge and our ancestral wisdom, and become a higher level of being, and to become in touch with the things that make us human. And that is family, that is folk, that is country, that is divinity, that is all of these things that are just wonderful and wholesome and make us complete as men, as humans, as Germanic people. Hail Odin, hail the folk, and hail everybody in the chat that tuned in. God bless all of you and all of your wonderful, beautiful families. May the springtime bring endless, just fruitful gardens and beautiful angel babies for your tribes. Thank you again, Mr. J. God bless you, sir, and your wonderful family.
Thank you. I would say in closing that I think that the neo-pagan movement is a reaction. It's a reaction to things that are degenerate, that are problematic, obviously across not just the Western world, but eventually, and as we're seeing now, global degeneracy and toxicity. However, I don't think it is ultimately the correct solution. I think that Orthodox Christianity is what is the right solution and has been there as the right solution for the last 2 millennia. I think that the collapse of the Roman Catholic Church, of which you said you have kind of come out of, signifies this. I don't fault you for questioning the Roman Catholic Church and looking elsewhere. I think that's a very logical approach given the corruption and degeneracy in that institution. But in our view, there's a specific reason for why the Roman Catholic Church kind of fell into that degeneracy. And it relates ultimately to theology and the terms there, the theological terms that we make very precise and have definitions for. They're not just semantics. They actually have a very important point. I think what I wanted to stress in this debate was I believe that the position that you're presenting is relativistic at root, and it doesn't have a philosophical justification, which is needed. Certainly, we can be overly rational, but I think that orthodoxy, if it's practiced correctly, traditionally, it actually has a good balance between the mystical, the existential experience that you have in the liturgy, in the practice of hesychia, and the realm of what's logical and rational. So all the fathers did apologetics. They did these kind of debates. And if you are interested in the stuff that I've said, I would say just watch my video. I'm not going to drone on. I would say watch my video that deals with the prophecies of the Old Testament being fulfilled in Christ. And then I would say watch my video on St. Athanasius and his critique of paganism, because he has a lot of the same arguments I made there. So thank you. Great debate, great discussion. I'm really glad we kept it civil. We got heated, but we didn't get hateful and
yeah, big time. You know, this is just a shining example of how we can get together and we can speak like gentlemen. Like in the West, this is what the West is based on: is guys coming together and having a battle of wits and intellect. And even a guy like Jay, who is a philosophical guy, man, I'm beer on the porch nationalism. I'm just a blue collar guy. The fact that he would bring me on and let me talk is just an example of how we can act civilly and be gentlemen and in our quest to defeat degeneracy. But real quick before we end, may I give a plug to where people can find my content, Mr. J?
Yeah, and I've got your link there below, but sure, go ahead.
Yeah, you guys can find me on Twitter at Big Dave Martel. Gab and mine's at Dave Martel. You can go subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is called Dave Martel. You can also find me tonight on Verbo Tempestus YouTube channel with The Conduit, where we dig into all kinds of crazy esoteric conspiracy theories. And also find me on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Raffenfolk channel, where I talk about all kinds of other heathen, pagan contexts, subjects, have all kinds of awesome interviews. Or you go to Amazon.com, pick up a copy of my book, The American Loyalist, Proclamation of Moral Insurrection. Our founders selflessly flung themselves at God's gracious feet in the name of liberty. Now they look down from their heavenly thrones in disgust. Pick up your father's swords under the Republic and reclaim what is yours. God wills it. Conquer or die. I am Big Dave Martel. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hail victory.
It's like the Viking Alex Jones there or something. All right, man. Thank you. Good talk. And yeah, so his links will be below. Thank you guys for the super chats. Thanks everybody for watching. Check out Jay's analysis. Be sure to subscribe to my stuff if you haven't. And until next time.